Welcome back everyone, and welcome to the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage. You are looking at something that is new, or at least new for me. Many times you guys have watched my videos and you've come there, and I've been so happy that if you have found them helpful, it's very rewarding for me to hear because of the time I spend making the videos and doing my restorations on machines. But what's behind this cover? This cover is actually, you'll notice it's actually pretty tall. The cover itself was originally designed for a Singer 400 Slant-O-Matic, and how I ended up with this extra cover I don't even remember, but I'm using it to keep the dust off this item. And in close to 10 years of this hobby of mine, restoring vintage home sewing machines, I have never ever taken on a project like this one. And so very often I hear from people on the channel and they'll say, well, gosh, I'm afraid to try something new. I watch your videos. I wish I knew, some of the things that, or they wish they had the same experience I have. And there are people with more experience than I have, and, and so it goes. But I wanted you guys to see this because I have zero experience working on these. And, anyway, I'm going to show this to you guys. A little hint, this particular, it is a sewing machine. It's not a mixer. It's not a mixer. It was designed by a Swiss company, but it was made in Japan. Now, some of you may, the process of elimination, maybe you will guess what this is. It is very complex. I consider it more complex than most, certainly more complex than straight stitch sewing machines. And you could argue it's even more complex than multi-stitch sewing machines, at least from the vintage era. And but anyway, keeping the dust off it is one thing, but I wanted to take this and show it to you guys. Yes, it is an Elna lock Pro 5. And of course the model number is actually L5D, like door. And I decided to rescue this Serger. There was somebody who goes around collecting, not collecting as in collector, but rescuing, salvaging things, and somehow they came up with this. Now, this is, I was not able to inspect this ahead of time. Just saw the price and thought, okay, I'll take a shot. And, you never know what you're going to get in that case. So you always want to be aware of, when you think about the price you're paying for something. And I mentioned this to you all many times when I've talked about how to purchase a vintage sewing machine. Now, this Elna, by the way, is or was a Swiss company. It's been bought out. The brand is owned by someone else now, and but Elna was originally a Swiss sewing machine manufacturer, and like many other companies, they eventually put their name on what we in North America call Sergers. They are actually, technically, they do the same thing that Overlock machines do. In fact, they are Overlock machines. And I'll talk either in this video or I'm going to make a series of videos on this little creature why do some people in the world call them Overlock machines and some people call them Sergers, and which one is right? And we'll get to that. But I wanted you guys to see this because I have never worked on a Serger. Sergers are sewing machines, but they have a lot more going on, in my opinion. My totally inexperienced opinion. And you can see here, some of you who are sewers who watch my channel, you may even have Sergers. You may not be a stranger to Sergers, but there's a lot there's a lot going on in a Serger. Now, you guys may remember I did some videos on the Merrow overlock machines that I had, and I had two of them. I just noticed there's a little part here just sitting down in the bottom. I have no idea what it is. Looks like a washer. Anyway, the overlock machine, which is what this is, and we're calling it a Serger. Again, we'll talk about the nomenclature in a moment. The overlock machine was invented in the 1880s, I think it was, by the Merrow company. which is still in business today. I mentioned that when you guys were looking at the old Merrow machines that I had. Those are overlock machines. They're still in business. They still make them, and they still sell parts for the old ones. Well, so the idea of an overlock machine or a serger is not new. But for home use, for what we call domestic, consumer level products, they were not introduced for like 80 years, 80 plus years. And then in the 1960s, there were engineers in Japan who at this point were making a lot of the sewing machines on the planet. You still had some, Singer was still making some in North America, but a lot of that production had moved away from Europe and the US to Japan. Remember, Japan used to be the country of choice for outsourcing before China came along. And so during that time, there were engineers in Japan who knows, maybe they had been inspired by looking at industrial overlock machines, a number of which were also being made in Japan. And they invented the very first home serger overlocker, and I believe under the name Juki, J-U-K-I. Some of you know that name in sewing machines and sergers to this day. And they created early sergers. Now those sergers were almost all metal, no surprise, and they came out at a kind of an interesting time, because you don't see, it's not like millions of them get sold right then, because remember, they're very new. And most people who sew had never seen an overlock machine unless they worked in a sewing factory. So they were not cheap. They were expensive. They were state-of-the-art, product and technology. So you can imagine that the consumers who had been sewing, who were fairly conservative, in terms of the equipment they use, it was not an easy sell at first. And it would take a while for the whole idea of a home serger to be something that a sewer would want to have. Many people never did buy one, and they did just fine with their sewing machine. So this was not really created to replace the sewing machine, but it did something interesting. It was created in part to be a time saver. I believe that's probably how it was marketed. And don't forget that by the time we get to the late 1960s and early 1970s, the fashion world has gone crazy for knits. Now, knits have always been around, but there was a massive, there was a preoccupation, if you will, with getting fabrics that were easy to maintain. People's lifestyles were changing. More people were going into the workforce. And having to iron clothing, which had traditionally been made, with cottons for the most part, a lot of clothing had been. And if you know that traditional cotton needs to be ironed, it just does, it wrinkles. And having to press things, because remember this, we were in a world where you had to show up, you showed up for work with a starched collar pressed clothes. You had to look sharp walking in the door. And so you saw this explosion of knits, because knits are a little different. Now, a knit can sometimes wrinkle, but not nearly as much as a woven, right? It's just the nature of how knits are constructed. Knit fabrics, knit clothing, we're talking about here. So, and a good example of this is a t-shirt. Think about it. If you have a jersey knit t-shirt, it can wrinkle, but it typically doesn't wrinkle as bad as even a lightweight woven can really get creases and wrinkles, and you have to iron them, or if you care. Now, so imagine you have this explosion in knits, and then you have a huge acceptance in the marketplace for synthetic fibers. You have nylons, which was one of the first synthetic fibers, and then you get polyester. And when polyester hits the market, it explodes. Everyone wants to, and you're wearing plastic. Today, if you have a water bottle, plastic water bottle, or a plastic bottle of soda pop, the plastic that makes up your drink bottles is very similar. It's not in a fiber form, but it's very similar to polyester fibers and fabrics. Anyway, so you can see this huge interest in knits, whether they're, no matter what they're made of, whatever the fiber. And that presents issues, because when you're trying to sew a knit, you really need to be able to do so in a way that that has stitches that will not instantly pop, because knits are designed to stretch, right? And now, eventually, the sergers, the overlock machines, they were created. You could do a lot of really great things with them because of the way the stitches were formed. And then later, in fact, I think this is one of the first. I think this was one of the first Elna sergers to have differential feed. And what that means is, excuse me, differential feed simply means that the machine can take into account stretchy fabrics. Okay. And whereas if you've ever tried to sew any kind of knit or stretch fabric on a traditional sewing machine, it can definitely be done. Our ancestors did it and they managed to do it, but it's not fun, it's time consuming, and it can be frustrating. The other thing that sergers were an answer to was to finish seams. Okay, so for example, this little cover is actually a woven. It's got like a sort of like a flannel, fuzzy surface on there. But this is I believe it's a woven. Yeah, this is a woven, and yet it has a serged edge. Whoops! Let me show this to you guys. See if it will show up in the light here. If you look, and a lot of you, if you look at your clothing, you will see it will have an edge like this, right? It will have a serged edge, because when you have fabric and you have, and I'm talking about wovens largely here, when you have woven fabrics and you cut them, they can ravel or unravel and fray very easily. So you have to finish the seam, right? Well, you had different ways of doing that. You could create French seams. You had to do a lot of folding, a lot of ironing and pinning. You could do a rolled hem, but again, that meant you had to have a rolled foot, and then you had to feed it. It really slows things down. Well, the serger, the home serger, could do what it could certainly do in the factory, and factories were always about saving time, which is one of the reasons overlock machines were created in the first place, to save time on the factory floor. Well, in home projects, you could save time as well with a serger because it has blades, and as the fabric feeds through, those of you who have sergers know this, but bear with me, as the fabric feeds through, it will cut the fabric, and it will finish the edge of your fabric for you. And this is a huge time saver, right? Again, I sound like a person trying to market home sergers, and I'm just trying to imagine the effort it took to get people to be open to buying one of these things, because they were not cheap. Now, this says engineered, and it's got, the address in Switzerland where the Elna company was once based. Elna is not Swiss anymore. There is no Elna company. There's an Elna brand today, and just like Singer, just like Pfaff, Necki, there's a lot of brands out there that are legacy brands, but the companies that made them don't exist anymore, sadly. They were gobbled up in mergers, but the names are out there, and they still seem to have weight with customers. So you look at this thing and you think, holy cow, it's reasonably heavy. Now, this serger would have been made and sold circa around 1984, the mid-80s. And the reason I know that is because I've been in touch with someone who has one of these, and when she got hers, she was the original purchaser. And what's interesting about that is she mentioned that back then in the mid-80s, this brand new cost her $1,000. And I don't know if that was the MSRP. It was probably, maybe she got a little bit off. But I went into the consumer price calculator, guys. This serger, if it was sold today, in today's dollars, you would be looking at, I kid you not, about $2,600. Now, today you can get sergers cheaper than that. They do make some pretty fancy ones that are expensive out there. I think they can go up to $1,600, $1,700, maybe even more, pushing $2,000. But they have even more features. They have more plastic than this one does. This one has some plastic, but I can see that the main chassis here, this is steel, which is kind of nice. But imagine someone saying, hey, how badly do you want a serger? Well, this Elna is a pretty good one. Yeah, it's $2,600. And I've talked to you guys before about the price of other items. Things like sewing machines and sewing tables, right? It will floor you when you realize that the old items, the old consumer items from the past, they had great quality, but they weren't cheap. You know, a lot of times people complain about the quality of modern consumer items. Well, that's because most of them they don't cost very much. Even when we think they do, we've been conditioned to think that they should not cost very much. Not that we shouldn't all want to be smart, savvy consumers. You know, I try to as often as I can. Anyway, let's take a look. We're going to take a look at what we have here. This would have been, this is the model that was made before digital, or well, not really computerized, but they started putting LCD screens in as early as the 90s. And I didn't want one of those because I was concerned that those things have a really short lifespan. You know, they eventually fail, and I didn't think I could get parts. We're going to talk about that. And I'm going to try to cover this in several videos here, guys. But today I just want to kind of give you, just kind of going over, you know, why I bought this, why I want to take it on. Because I think my experience with those Merrow overlockers had me realizing, wow, what if you wanted to be able to do what the Merrow can do, but you don't want to have the space for a big industrial table? You know, it's a space thing. Well, if you look at this, right? I mean, I just opened up the little front door here, and it's got a, you know, we'll talk later about the thread guides and why that is extremely important, because sergers have a reputation for being fussy and complex. And they certainly do require more of you than a basic vintage sewing machine, but there may be benefits. And again, as I mentioned starting out, I have never worked on one of these ever in my life. I've never even held one. I've seen them in sewing stores and seen them, you know, online. And I'm going to take you guys through this process, and I did this on purpose. I occasionally try to make myself a guinea pig, not just because I'm curious, but I want you guys to see me do that. Because sometimes people are afraid to try things. You know, maybe they're a little intimidated. So let's take a look. Today is just kind of kicking the tires here. We're not plugging it in, and those of you who've watched my channel will know why I'm not plugging it in. I'm not going to test it to see if it runs, because I want to see what condition it's in. The person that sold it to me was not a sewer. I think they rescued it and probably found it somewhere and tried to make some money on it. Who knows? It's still covered in dust, and I don't think they are a sewing person. They sell all kinds of stuff. But I saw it and I thought, oh, it's an Elna. It's, you know, I want to try to rescue it. You know, it's old enough to hopefully not have too much plastic, but there's issues with sergers vintage that you want to think about. We'll get to that. Okay, what are you looking at here? Well, you look at a lot of places to put threads. They are color-coded. Those of you who've ever threaded a serger or even heard about how maddening that can be, you will appreciate the fact that it is color-coded. I see red, blue, yellow, green, right? Now this it's kind of interesting. This particular serger will utilize 5 combs of thread, but it only has 4 of these tension discs. And as I go through learning, we'll figure out why. I think one of them is a different thread that's used for a different part of making the stitch. But we'll figure that out. Now, let's see. Looking around here, this looks like what I think is, yeah, this is the sort of the take-up arm, if you will, if you're trying to think of a sewing, you know, a lock stitch regular sewing machine at home. And you're going to see places that have lots of thread guides. That's not a surprise. And coming around the side here, this is a guard. I think this little, it would help if I got us back to where you guys can see what I'm pointing at. There we go. This is a plastic guard, and I think it's designed, hear it creaking when I turn it. Sounds like an old door in a haunted house. Okay, so this I believe is to protect the sewer because not only do you not want the needle hitting you, you do not want your fingers near the blade. Remember, there's a blade, there's a set of blades in here. What else have we got? We've got, this is interesting, guys. Those of you who know, I'm going to tilt this up so you can see this. Those of you who know the Singer 300, the 301, the 400 and 500 series, you know that Singer did slanted needles. Well, look here. We have a slanted needle bar for the, you guys can see me turning it. Let's get you a better view there. Right? You can see the needle and the needle bar at an angle. How cool. I don't know if it's the same as the Singer Slantomatics, but we'll see. Now, behind this door, now remember, I'm looking at this and I'm kind of trying to show you guys, anytime you have anything new, I don't care if it's a sewing machine, a serger, or a blender, I don't know, whatever it is, and you're exploring. Now, I went online and I have downloaded PDFs. I downloaded a PDF of the service manual, which I'm glad to have because that'll help me trying to overhaul and restore something I've never even seen before. And I got a user manual. Someone was kind enough to share theirs with me, which is a lot better than the one I actually paid for. It was only $5. And then I got the one from this person who was kind enough to share theirs with me, and it looks better. So I'm excited about that. And this is true, you know, anytime you guys are getting a machine, even if you are experienced sewing, when you get any sewing machine, including the vintage models, get yourself the manual if you can. It's going to save you a lot of time. Now, this says max 15 watt. It has a little symbol there. I'm guessing this is where the light bulb is. Now, I don't, you know, you guys saw me turn it. There's a hinge here. So I'm going to very carefully pull, right? Very carefully, because this is plastic and it has a plastic clasp, right? The vintage sewing machines I work on have metal here, but see, they couldn't even spring for metal here, right? They put plastic there. And, well, this is kind of cool. If I turn the machine, it has rubber feet that work really well. I have to turn it. There's kind of like a mirrored, I don't know if it's a mylar or what it is, but it's a reflective material, and here, of course, is the bulb. Nothing, that's just like a little old-fashioned night light bulb, nothing special. I can keep it. I could probably replace it with an LED, and I might. Now, I have seen photographs of some of the very first Juki sergers ever made, okay? And the Juki company also made them for Singer. The Singer ones were kind of a like a Wedgwood blue color, and then the Juki version was sort of a Kelly green, shamrock green color, but they were the same machine. Those machines had what I like to see on my vintage sewing machine, lockstich machines, the take-up lever, right, the take-up arm for the foot, for the sewing foot, is back here. But even in the mid-80s, they had already replaced the take-up arm with plastic, okay? Now, this is designed, it's spring-loaded, and let's see, the mid-80s, what are we looking at here? Got 35 years old, you know, pushing, you know, a few years, it'll be 40 years old. I'm not going to do this. Now, why am I not going to pull this up? It doesn't look broken or cracked. It's 35-year-old plastic. Now, what do we know? What have I talked about in the past when it comes to parts of sewing machines? When you're touching plastic, behind that plastic is metal, okay? So let's get a little picture here, what we can see. We know that the needle bar is metal. I don't know if that needle bar is gummed up. I don't know. I know I haven't oiled it. This thing may have sat for 20 years. These parts were all designed to work, including the little plastic lever here, when everything has been maintained. So just as I mentioned you guys before on sewing machines, when you have a plastic knob, if it's a vintage sewing machine worth restoring, in my opinion, it'll have steel behind it. So don't ever force them. If you touch it and it turns smoothly, okay, no problem. You're still going to need to go behind and maintenance the metal pieces that it connects to. But if there's any stiffness at all, stop. Just don't push it. Don't push your luck, because you will be very unhappy if you have to replace it. and we're going to talk about replacement, because I went into this, you know, eyes wide open. I knew that there were going to be an issue potentially with parts for this thing. Now, let's see here. What do you see on the back? You see there's a little cover here, and because I see vents, that usually tells me there should be a motor back in here. Okay. Notice on the side we've got a place for, there are two big spool pins because we're going to be using cones. Serging takes so much thread. If you use a regular traditional sewing spool of thread, you're not going to get very far before you run out of thread. And over here we have another 3. So again, there's a place for 5 cones, but there are only 4 tension discs. And I believe because the fifth thread cone, I don't know where it goes yet, but I think it's going to be for something called a chain stitch, or a cover stitch. We'll see. Forgive me if I sound ignorant, because I am. I'm kind of going along and learning just with you guys. So what do I see over here on this side? I see a place where the plug goes. Let's tilt the camera down here. You guys can see that. And fortunately, I instinctively wanted to turn this toward, you know, here's the front. And they even did an arrow here to remind you, don't turn this backwards, right? Okay. Now, when I got it, it was, you know, this was kind of stiff. It still is. It's moving, it still is stiff. There's a power button down here. Seems nice and solid. And it came with its original plug and cord and foot pedal. And the foot pedal is, it says Matsushita Electric, which means pretty sure this was Japanese made. You can see the speed controller. Now, I believe it may be one of the early electronic pedals. Now, when we talk about parts, I'll talk about if you ever have to replace a Serger pedal and cord. We'll talk about that. But anyway, it came with that. So I saw this. Remember, I saw it listed on the internet, on a classified, and all I saw was, it said, machine is complete. Now, there's something missing. Those of you who have Sergers probably have already figured it out. You will notice in the back here, well, let's talk about this first. It says Tavaro, SA, Geneva, Switzerland. But it was not made in Switzerland. That's where Elna was headquartered back when Elna was Elna, before it got sold and eaten up by a bigger company. And it gives you the amperage, 115 volts, so we know it's for North American Electric. It says produced in Japan for Elna. It's important to remember that home Sergers, or home overlock machines, you know, they're invented in the mid-60s. By the time you get to the late 60s, early 70s, people in North America are starting to discover them. And again, it's the drive for nits and saving time that's pushing this. And when that happens, by that time, sewing machine production in North America and in Europe is shrinking. You know, they're outsourcing more and more to Japan. So please, you guys tell me if you know of an exception, but it's my understanding that there never were home Sergers or overlock machines. They never were made in Europe or North America. They began their existence as being produced in Japan. Today, most of them are made in China, some are made in Thailand, and some are made in Taiwan. There may be some made in Japan, but a very small sliver, depending, probably the most expensive, right? Because it's not cheap to make things in Japan anymore. Okay, but I told you guys what is missing, and I didn't see this, I didn't notice it, and again, you know, I was able to get this, but this is a thread stand, or excuse me, a thread thread tower that you pull your threads up off the combs, and it's telescoping, and it's supposed to telescope up, and then it branches out like a little tree, right? And it'll hold a thread guide point up above all of these spools. So I got it home. I was like, hey, wait a minute, where's the, oh. Now, there are times when sellers will intentionally be dishonest with you. they will claim they don't know anything and they're just trying to get rid of something. In this case, I don't think that's what happened. I really think the seller saw it and he saw the cord and the pedal and he's like, oh, it's got a cord and a pedal and this turns, I'm sure it's good. And he just said, machine is complete. I don't believe I was lied to. I believe I was sold something by someone who didn't fully comprehend what they were selling. And this is another reason you want to learn to ask questions when you're purchasing something, right? Is everything there? If the person is a sewer and they tell you, oh yeah, I've been using this for a while, but I don't need it anymore, or I got a new one, or what have you, okay, that person should know. But the person I bought this from doesn't sew, and they sell all kinds of stuff. You know, it's kind of a potluck collection of all sorts of mishmash of things, and they happen to have this Serger. I don't know where they got it. Who knows? Okay, so when I make another video on this, I will talk to you guys about what I'm going to do about this situation. But let's see. And what else am I looking for? I want to look for screws. I see access screws, right? I see access screws on the machine. I see one here. I was looking underneath. If I can tilt this up, you guys can see there's two right there underneath this little piece. There are two on the back underneath. I think these connect the big thread stand here to the back of the machine. What else do I see on this thing? Oh, I see. Oh, forgot to talk about this button. This dial on the side here is used, and it does, and I want to go inside and inspect before I start turning it. This is where you adjust the machine for the elasticity of fabric, and if you have one of these, you should have differential feed. Sergers without it, I'm sure, are fine. I'm sure they do a good job, but this was a big deal for people who were doing very elastic material. Sewing things that stretch is not fun on a machine that doesn't have the ability to build in some play in the stitches so they can stretch with the fabric. But this one does, so that's hooray. That's a great thing to see. Let's see, what else can we talk about? We've got, if I tilt this toward you guys, you will see there are two access screws on the top. And I'm going to need to figure out how I see, now I'm seeing screws here, and it's always important to remember what screws do you want to touch and which ones you don't. This is another thread guide. It's not connected to any of the mechanics inside. I see two screws here. So we'll take a look. I haven't looked at the service manual yet, and we'll see what it will tell me and what it will not. And let's see. And before we finished, I wanted to show you guys this. Now I was looking, again, I don't know how this comes off. I haven't even looked at the manual yet. That's another reason to get a manual. Having a user manual can prevent you from harming your machine, because if you just want to guess, but because I've seen, I remember my industrial overlocker, right? And I'm going to push. Normally this bed, part of the bed of the machine will swing away. Let's push. There we go. I just heard metal. Do you guys hear that go ding, like a spring? Haha. Okay. Let's lower the camera down. I'm finding that it might be easier to get you guys a better view here. Now, let's take a look. What you're seeing is a combination of steel and plastic bits. And this is a great place to show you guys. And oh, how nice, they've actually got red paint on a hole, which normally indicates where you should oil it. Now, and we'll talk more about maintenance, because I've mentioned to you guys before, there's oiling for normal maintenance, and then there are oiling points that you should use when you're restoring a sewing machine, and those are different. Okay, that's more of a servicing. But let's, I'm going to rotate, just let you guys see, I'm going to rotate very slowly the hand wheel, and look, let's take a look at what's moving here. If you didn't have these little red marks, and even if you do, I may still want to oil some points here if this thing's been sitting, and I think it has been. That's just, now look over here, guys. If you put your eyes here, let's get you a little closer, you will see some of the loopers that come in and out. So not only do you don't have a bobbin and a bobbin case. What you have is a needle thread. You have lots of threads, and these loopers are essentially tying the loops that form the stitch. Now, the fact that I have movement, that's a good thing, right? But again, I've got pieces. I can tell just based on my experience with traditional sewing machines, those are lock stitch machines, that this thing hasn't been used in a while. But you'll notice I'm not going to put oil in it right away. But in the next video, I'm going to talk to you guys about what more access can we get to this old serger. You know, what can I do? Whoops. What can I do to be able to see more inside? Because I do that with all the other traditional sewing machines. I'll give you guys another view here. I want you to see this. This is one of the reasons this was so expensive when new. And even today, you can spend quite a lot on sergers. Watch when I'm turning, you can't see my hand on the right, but I'm turning slowly the hand wheel. Look at this, guys. Look at all this synchronized movement, right? And I can even see the needle here. This needle is deflecting when this is called the upper looper. That I know from my work with the old Merrow industrial. And I'm going to have to find out. I've got to learn. Is that normal? Part of me says no. The looper and the needle come together because you see the loopers, they are doing, and this is kind of a rough, I'm not even sure if this is a good comparison, guys, but I'll try. This is, you know, you guys know that your hook and shuttle underneath your sewing machine works with your needle thread to form your stitches. Well, here, the looper comes, you know, has to be timed just right with the needle. But I don't know if the needle is loose. I can't really tell. I'm going to have to investigate this. And there are all kinds of adjustments that can be made here. I have no idea what this little, there's a little washer here. And it, you know, when you see a washer, well, you're like, well, it goes to something. And I don't yet know what that washer was on. I'm going to have to find out. Because I'm sure the machine will talk to me and it will let me know it's unhappy if it's missing anything. Notice that there are screws here. Unlike a lot of the drivetrain in some of the vintage sewing machines I've worked on, which normally, you know, you normally don't take those apart. And yet here, you'll notice here's one of the loopers. I think this is the chain stitch looper. This one has that feature. Notice there's a Phillips head screw, and when that looper wears out or is damaged and needs replacing, you have to attach it, reattach it, you have to adjust it. And again, this is just based on the very early part of what I know. Now, under here, don't know if you guys can see, it'll help if I don't do that. I'm going to take something to point with. Find something that will show up on the camera here for you guys. Take a look, guys. If you look really closely, right here is the upper blade. Okay, right here is the lower blade. Not sure how well that is showing up for you guys because of the light I've got. Let's try that. How's that? Maybe that's a little bit better. So here's an upper blade, and this blade moves. So notice when I'm turning the hand wheel. Notice you'll see it coming down, right? And the blade edge is right there. And the stationary blade, the bottom blade, is right here. So when the fabric comes through, that's where your slicing goes. It's my understanding that some sergers, I don't know if that's true of this one, they were made with such high quality blades that they have some kind of really hard carbide material that helps them to last like a long time. I have ordered replacements because I wanted to kind of look at a parts list, and we'll talk about that next video, but I don't know if my current blades are still sharp. I will know when I finally crank this up and see if it works. I have no idea, by the way. I don't even know if this overlocker works, but that's true of any sewing machine I've ever bought, guys. You know, I've bought machines where I wanted to get them to work, and you know, I would take a chance if the price was good enough. I would take a chance on, oh look, at least over here they did use metal for this clip, unlike the little light door, I guess because this one is, and this is also steel, I'm happy to see. There are panels that cover the machine made of plastic, but at least this is steel, because don't be shocked by this, but as you go in time from the very first Juki and some of the other brands they made for companies, those very first overlockers, baby locks, as they were referred to, they eventually would take more and more of the steel out and put more plastic in. And some of the modern sergers, I would hope that some of the drivetrain obviously is steel, but they just kept taking more out. Like this here, this is steel. This little piece down here underneath the tray is plastic. Now, manufacturers will always say, oh, well, you know, that helps keep the weight down. Yeah, it also keeps their costs down, and it can harm the quality, but we'll see. So guys, let me know what you think. Let me know if you think that this was wise. Again, I had just done a cursory bit of research on vintage, on sergers, period. That threading sergers can be a royal pain. You guys are going to get to find out how much of a pain it is for me, because I'm going to take you through this. But I wanted you guys to see me do something for the first time. And my knowledge is pretty limited. I've joined some groups on online, serger groups, to kind of say hello and lean on some of the people out there who have more experience. Anybody has more experience than I do with sergers. And I'm doing this in part because A, I'm curious about it, and I have a goal of being able to make some things with sergers, because the idea of rolling a hem does not thrill me. There's nothing wrong with it, but I'm planning on making like some bed linens, and that's a lot of rolling I don't want to do. And I wanted to see, again, I could not find one of the very first of those Juki, of the baby locks ever made, but I found this one, and this one is, you know, it's 35 years old. So I'm going to see if it's possible to bring this back to life, and how much is it going to cost me in time and money, and is it even possible? So there you go, guys. I am volunteering to be a guinea pig here. For those of you who know sergers, feel free to chime in. You may, I'm sure you will have a lot to teach me. Anyone would if you have any experience with sergers. But I'm fascinated by them, and it was my work with the old Merrow industrial sergers. Those sergers have been sold. I really wanted more space for some other projects I'm doing, and there are people who can really use an industrial serger. They are going to be doing a lot of work. I'm not, and so, you know, I could collect things until I, you know, had no room to move in my home. So I really wanted to find something that looks like it's about the same size as a, I don't know, popcorn popper or something. I don't even know what to call it, but it doesn't have much of a footprint. And anyway, this is the newest thing on my bench. This will go into my purchasing series, and you guys bear with me. And if you've never taken on a serger, if you've never tried to work on one, maybe you've never used one, many of you have not, then feel free to watch me fumble and stumble along the way. And I do this also not only because I want to experiment with something I've never done before. I want you guys who are new to sewing machine repair, restoration, maybe you just like to troubleshoot and maintain your own machine. I want you guys to see me, you know, trip and fall and pick myself up, because sometimes people, you know, YouTube videos can make things look simple and easy, and sometimes people are like, well, yeah, easy for you, but they're afraid to try stuff because they're afraid, oh, maybe I'll screw it up. But, you know, didn't have to give a ton for this, and I, you know, I didn't even know if this thing would run. I didn't know if it had missing parts. I literally had to buy it on a whim, not on a whim, but basically roll the dice on it. And so you guys will see if all of my effort and time will pay off, and if it will ever run. I don't know, but I sure appreciate you watching, and if you If you need some comedy relief, then feel free to tune in, because I can promise you there's going to be something to laugh at as you watch me fumble and explore this thing. Because, you know, sometimes we enjoy things so much, we take them seriously, and I take the restoration of my home lockstich sewing machines very seriously. But sometimes if we take things too seriously, it gets a little ridiculous. And the least I can do is have fun with this thing, and just at least just be so impressed with the fact that this thing, just somebody figured out how to engineer these things so long ago, back in the 60s. They became a thing. And those of you who have modern sergers, I'm sure, have many tales to tell about things you like and things that frustrate you. But anyway, guys, I wanted to share something different with you. Stay tuned. I'm going to be making videos on this, and you feel free to follow along as we go. And I don't know, cross your fingers, say some prayers, and we'll see what happens. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.